Thank you, Ambassador Mack. Earl has been a great friend forever, a great leader of the RJC, and a man with enormous courage. He actually co-chaired my finance campaign when I ran for governor against Mario Cuomo when no one thought I had a chance to win. So Earl, thank you for that introduction. And to all of you here at the RJC, thank you for what you do. You are a critical wing and element of the Republican Party. Let me be very blunt. Without you, we don't win elections. Without you, America isn't going to become the great country it can be in the 21st century again when we win the presidency in 2016. I want to start this morning by commenting a little on the San Bernardino tragedy of yesterday. We don't know the circumstances yet for sure, whether or not it involved terrorism or not. We do know it was a horrible, horrible planned assault. But let me tell you what else we do know. We do know that the Boston Marathon bombing was carried out by radical jihadists here in America. We do know that the Fort Hood massacre of our soldiers was carried out by a radical jihadist here in America. We do know that the Garland, Texas attacks that almost took place and would have massacred dozens of innocent Americans had they not been stopped by a Texas police officer was a radical jihadist radicalized here in America. We know that the Chattanooga murder of the Marine recruiters was carried out by a radical jihadist here in America. The Obama administration's response to that murder of those Marine recruiters was for them to take off their uniforms. My reaction would be, don't take off your uniforms, put on your guns. You're Marines, this is America. We're not going to live in fear in the United States of America. But there's a broader point here. Every one of those attacks, terrorist attacks on American soil here since Barack Obama was president, have been carried out by people who have been radicalized to engage in a warped view of jihad. We do not have to tolerate that type of speech or action here in America. You know, I'm a great believer in our Constitution, particularly the First Amendment. What is happening in some of our universities is completely crazy. But there is a rule of law in this country. The First Amendment does not allow you to shout fire in a crowded theater. You cannot call on Americans to engage in violent jihad against their fellow Americans and claim it's protected by the First Amendment. It is not. It is shouting fire in a crowded theater. We have got to shut down every effort of Islamists to radicalize people here in America, whether it's happening in a mosque, on the internet, through social media, or in community hall meetings. No radicalization in America. It is not protected speech. It is a crime, and we must stop it before there are more attacks here on American soil. Now let me just say, I'm sure as you were scrolling through the program for today, you saw all the different candidates, and I heard and saw Lindsey Graham and Senator Rubio, and you come to Pataki, and you go, Pataki? You know, well, maybe I can take a bathroom break. Or maybe I can go out in the hall and try to finish that deal I'm working on. Why is he in this race? You know, yeah, he was governor of New York. He seems like a nice guy, but he's been out of office for 8 years. We have 1 million candidates. Why is he there? Well, let me tell you seriously why I am here. There are two things I know about 2016. We have to win the race. It is that simple. We cannot nominate somebody and think the job is over because we love our nominee. We have got to nominate someone who will actually beat Hillary Clinton and be the next president of the United States. And you know, I don't think there's a person in this room who doesn't understand Mitt Romney would have been a far better president than Barack Obama. No question about it. But he didn't win. He didn't win. So we have to win the next race. And the second thing is we have to elect someone who isn't just going to talk about all the things they're going to do, but actually go out there and get it done. Do the job. You know, two of our leading candidates today never held public office. And part of the reason is Republicans, Americans are fed up with politicians. Oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, I'm going to do that. But nothing seems to change. And it's I'm sure it's hard to change things in Washington, but we need to elect someone who isn't just going to talk about what they're going to do. When they have the chance to lead this country, they have got to be able to actually change government in a dramatic and important way. So why am I running? Well, I got elected in New York 3 times in a state with 3 million more Democrats. If that doesn't matter, maybe I shouldn't be in the race. I got reelected twice with the largest margins for any Republican ever in the history of New York State. If that doesn't matter, maybe I shouldn't be in the race. I got a plurality of the Dominican and Puerto Rican vote in New York State, and the Latino vote is critical for the next race. If that doesn't matter, perhaps I shouldn't be in the race. And by the way, I ran as an unabashed conservative. I didn't just run on the Republican line. I ran on the Republican and Conservative Party line. And I'm the only person in the history of New York State elected governor running as a conservative. So if those things don't matter, if we nominate somebody we love but can't win the race, then maybe I shouldn't be in the race. But I am in the race because if I get the nomination, let me tell you one thing, I will beat Hillary Clinton in November of 2016. And the second point is getting things done. I didn't just hold office for 12 years. I changed and put in place the most sweeping conservative agenda of any state in America. When I took office, we were the most dangerous state in America. When I left, we were the 4th safest. If that doesn't matter, maybe I shouldn't be in the race. When I took office, we were dead last in taxes, had the lowest credit rating, and $5 billion in debt when it mattered, $5 billion. When I left, we had the highest credit rating in the state's history, billions in surplus. And by the way, I had cut taxes by $143 billion, more than the other 49 states combined. If that doesn't matter, maybe I shouldn't stay in this race. But I think it does matter. And most importantly, our party has always been about replacing dependency with opportunity. Their party, big government, great policies to support and help the poor. So many policies to help the poor, they end up creating more of them. And when I took office in New York, 1 in 11 of every man, woman, and child in the state of New York was on welfare. When I left office, we had over 1 million fewer people on welfare and the lowest unemployment rate in the history of New York State. If that doesn't matter, maybe I shouldn't be in the race. But I think it does matter. We need to nominate someone who can win, and when they win, can change the direction of Washington. Now, why is it so critical we win this race? Well, the Democratic Party is no longer a liberal party. It is a leftist party. It is a party that believes that Washington has the wisdom and certainly the power to dictate how we live our lives, to dictate everything from how we get health care, to how our kids are educated, to how we run our business, to how we live our lives. It's not about what the tax rate is going to be in 2016. It's the nature of America. Are we going to be in America where a group of elites in Washington dictate how we live our lives? Or are we going to be Americans who choose our own destiny and tell the politicians what we want them to do as opposed to them telling us what we have to do? That's what this election is about, the character of America, and we have got to win. And let me tell you a few of the things I would do. I will shrink the size of the federal government by 15%. People are going to say, how can you do it? When I left in New York, the government had more than 15% fewer workers than when I took office. We're going to get rid of Obamacare and get rid of those people in the health department. We're going to get rid of Common Core and get rid of the people working on that in the education department. We're going to scale back the EPA and its ridiculous regulations that are strangling our economy and energy in America. And by the way, I'm going to take every IRS employee involved in the illegal, unconstitutional, barbaric targeting of Republicans and conservative groups and not just fire them, but do my best to put them in jail, which is where they belong. So we're going to reduce the size of the government by at least 15%. I'm going to throw out a corrupt tax code. It is so absurd. Our taxes are so high that American companies constantly are looking to move overseas, not because they like it better, but because they can't afford to compete with our tax structure. A great New York company, founded almost 200 years ago, Pfizer, a big drug company, just last week announced a merger with a much smaller company, not because they wanted to be taken over, but because they're going to move their headquarters to Ireland. Instead of paying 39%, they will pay 12.5% taxes. That is absurd. This administration, the Democrats' view, is we have got to keep those companies here. They're not going to build a fence to keep out illegal immigrants, but they want to build a virtual wall to force American companies to stay here. It's kind of like the policies that worked so well in East Germany, where they actually had a wall to keep Germans from leaving. We don't need a wall to keep American companies from leaving. All we need to do is dramatically lower the tax rate, make us competitive here in America, and we will create jobs and opportunity in this country again. And by the way, I want to see us make things in America again. And one of the proposals I have in my tax proposal is to cut the rate on manufacturing from today, the highest in the world, to 12%, the lowest in the world. Democrats talk about income inequality, and then they drive all the good jobs offshore. Manufacturing are great jobs. We have entrepreneurs. We have capitalists. We have a great work ethic and workforce. We can outcompete anybody in the world if we get our government policies right. Let's make things in America again. Let's have manufacturing and factories here. I worked in college, Christmas and summer vacations in a factory. These are the jobs of the 21st century that can make our middle class strong again. Just get Washington out of the way, and we are going to build things again here in America. So let's revitalize Washington, shrink its power, give power back to the people and the individuals and the states. And I guarantee you that instead of the anemic growth we've seen for the last 7 years, the American economy will take off like a rocket. 2.1% average under Obama, over 7% growth during Ronald Reagan's term. We can do that again here in America. But as passionate as I am about our domestic policy, like you, I share your overriding concern about foreign policy. I know the most important thing government does is provide for the security and safety of its people. It's that simple. If you can't do that, everything else fails. And I've seen our government not succeed in providing for the security and safety of our people. To do that, we have to do, in my view, 3 things. First, we have to rebuild our military. It is absurd, thank you, it is absurd that in these times, when you see an overly aggressive China in the South China Sea, when you see Russia looking to reconstitute the Russian Empire, when you see Iran getting hundreds of billions in economic relief and looking to continue its support for state-sponsored terror, when you see radical Islam doing its horrible acts across Africa and the Middle East. It is not a time to reduce the size of the American military to pre-World War II levels. It's a time to reinvest in the American military, to build it, to strengthen it, invest in personnel, in training, in technology. And by the way, one of the technologies I would put back on the table and start right away is an anti-missile defense system, the Star Wars system that Ronald Reagan fought for. With radical Islam out there, we have got to be able to protect ourselves. Second thing I would do is stand with our allies. And that's something you think would be self-evident to the President of the United States. And yet, it hasn't been that way with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State or Barack Obama as President. I'd sit down with the Poles and say, remember those missiles you wanted to defend you from a potentially resurgent Russia that Hillary and Obama pulled out? Well, we're going to put them back in so you can defend yourselves and defend Europe. Look at a country like Egypt, where this administration, Hillary and Obama, embraced the Muslim Brotherhood that immediately starts taking aggressive action against Israel. And then when al-Sisi leads a counter-revolution that creates a stable pro-Western Egypt, they are ignored and cut off by this administration. That is wrong. He is fighting ISIS in the Sinai. We should embrace him, support his military efforts, and his efforts to reform Islam. stand with our allies. And by the way, I'll get to Israel, which I think is, if not the, certainly one of the strongest allies this country has ever had. And the third thing is we have to destroy radical Islam. It is that simple. You heard Earl Mack talk about the fact that I was governor on September 11th. Well, I tell you, I learned a lesson that day that I thought all Americans had learned and no one would ever forget. Think back. Al-Qaeda was isolated. They were in Afghanistan. They didn't have territory they controlled. They didn't have mass media or social media capability. They didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars. They didn't have sophisticated weapons. All they had were box cutters. They didn't have thousands of Westerners with passports. And yet they were able to carry out the most barbaric and horrible attacks on American soil ever. Now look at ISIS today. They control territory, hundreds of millions of dollars, sophisticated weapons, social media capability that we see in action all the time. Tragically, we cannot think that because ISIS is in the Middle East, that they're not actively trying to attack us here. They will. We have got to destroy them over there before they have the chance to attack us here. Now, let me tell you specifically what I would do. First of all, no 10-year war, no nation building, no $1 trillion trying to create a democracy where none has ever existed. But we know where their training camps, recruiting centers, planning hubs, social media sites are. We should work first with the troops on the ground, the Kurdish Peshmerga, and supply them with the sophisticated weapons, financing, and training that they have not gotten from this administration. And they have not gotten it from this administration because this ridiculous policy of this administration is everything has to go through Baghdad, which is largely controlled by Iran, and they don't want the Kurds to have a strong, independent fighting force, but we do. And we have got to arm, supply, support, and help them take the fight to ISIS. The same thing with the Yazidis, almost 1 million Christians who were barbarically massacred when ISIS attacked them. They are fighting them. They are part of the reason that Sinjar is being taken back from ISIS, but they don't have the training, the support, the weapons, the finance, and the help from the Americans. If I'm president, they will get that. And most importantly, though, are the Anbar Sunni sheiks. We defeated al-Qaeda back when President Bush was president because the Sunni sheiks realized that al-Qaeda was so radical that even though they shared a Sunni faith, they didn't share the philosophy or the radicalism, and they fought with us to destroy al-Qaeda. They are now seeing that same experience with ISIS. But Baghdad doesn't want an independent, strong, Sunni, Anbar-based force, whether they're fighting ISIS or not, because they're not controlled by Baghdad. Well, let me say this, as president, I don't care if Baghdad doesn't want the Sunnis on the ground to be able to fight ISIS and help us destroy their training camps. We will supply, support, train, finance, and help them have safe areas where they can mount their attacks on the ground against ISIS. And by the way, if that isn't enough, we should send in American troops. Send in American Special Operations Forces, destroy their training centers, destroy their planning hubs, destroy their social media capability centers, and then get out. Not so that we can stay there for 10 years, but so that we can send a clear and convincing message to the world that when we say we're going to destroy and degrade ISIS over time isn't in the next century, over time is in the next year, and ISIS will be destroyed and degraded. Now, I don't want to sound like a militarist here, but I know how important this is. And I also know what it's like to have loved ones in harm's way. I have 2 sons. My older son, when he graduated from Yale, went into the Marines and became a lieutenant. Thank you. Thank you. Became a lieutenant and served for a year in Anbar. My younger son got out of Cornell and went into the 10th Mountain Division. And he just got back from Afghanistan in September. He got back from Afghanistan in September where he served as a lieutenant. You know, my wife and I know what it's like when you're lying in bed and the phone rings at 2 or 3 in the morning And all of a sudden you get this feeling in your stomach, oh my God, I hope it's not the call when your loved one is in harm's way. I do not want one American family to have to go through that, to have to worry about their loved one being overseas in harm's way, unless it's absolutely necessary. But it is necessary to destroy ISIS, destroy their ability to attack us here over there, because if we don't do that, they are going to attack us again here in America. It is that simple. So we have to destroy radical Islam, and we have to take the fight to them overseas, using as limited American troops on the ground as possible, but if necessary, using them along with our allies. But there's one other thing that I know is important to you, and it's important to me. And that is when I said we have to stand with our allies. We have no better ally than the state of Israel. And I have known that. I've known that for some time. And I just want to tell you one story that I actually showed to my kids. Think back to the first Gulf War in 1989, when President George H.W. Bush put together an extraordinary coalition to take out Saddam Hussein's conquering of Kuwait. We had many Arab nations in that coalition, and it was a very important war for the Americans in the West to win. And when that fight started, what did Saddam do? He sent Scud missiles. Yes, he sent them into Kuwait, and yes, he sent them into Saudi Arabia. But he sent them into Israel, a non-combatant, not part of the coalition. He launched Scud missiles on Tel Aviv, on Jaffa, on Israeli civilians, simply because he was trying to provoke them into joining the fray, because he knew that would destroy the coalition that President Bush had put together. I remember that night, that first night, seeing pictures from Tel Aviv of old men and young children wearing gas masks in their homes, in their basements. I don't know if any of you remember that, because people didn't know if Saddam Hussein's rockets, his Scuds that he was firing into Israel, had chemical weapons or not. And I looked at it, and I actually went upstairs and woke up my two oldest kids. And I said, look at this. This is less than 45 years after the end of the Holocaust. These are old men and young children wearing gas masks to protect themselves. And you know why? Simply because they're Jews. And because Saddam Hussein thinks that by attacking Jews, he can undermine the American coalition. Never forget this moment. Anti-Semitism is a toxic, toxic feeling, and whenever you see it raise its ugly head, you must stomp it down wherever that happens. But what happened? Thank you. But what happened? Israel didn't go into Iraq to defend its civilians. And there's not one person here who doesn't know that the IDF could have taken out those Scud missiles and prevented those attacks on its civilians. But the Israeli leadership said, this is a horrible thing to see our civilians going through this. But we are America's friend. We are America's ally. We will let our civilians suffer this attack, because that is the strongest way we can support America in its effort. Have you ever heard of an ally more committed to helping you succeed than Israel was during that time of war? And since that time, I've had the opportunity over and over again to go to Israel. First time, I opened a trade mission in New York, from New York in Israel, and I couldn't believe there hadn't been one, but there hadn't. But I opened it, and people said, well, go to Tel Aviv, that's the commercial capital. We opened the trade mission in Jerusalem, the capital of the Israeli state. And we did it. We did it for a simple reason. It is the capital of Israel. It has got to be recognized by the United States as the capital of Israel. It is absurd that our closest ally is the one country whose capital we refuse to put our embassy in. We will recognize it, move the embassy. Jerusalem is the eternal, undivided capital of Israel and the Jewish people, and it has got to stay that way. But there's so much more we have to do. And I heard Senator Rubio's comments about the PLO, and I remember speaking in Las Vegas back in the spring. And I said then, Two other things. When you have an entity like the PLO that is paying bonuses to the families of mass murdering suicide terrorists, they should not get one nickel of taxpayer funding from the United States, zero money to the PLO so long as it supports those terrorist activities. And second of all, not only does the PLO give funding to terrorists, their charter, and they do not even recognize today Israel's right to exist as a state. You cannot have a partner for peace when one of them denies your existence. No more wasting time. No more wasting time with the Secretary of State tramping around trying to get Israel to make concessions to an organization that doesn't even acknowledge Israel's right to exist. No more negotiations. PLO, you change your charter, you acknowledge Israel's right to exist, and then we can sit down and have a talk. Finally, just one last thing. I'm running out of time. The Iranian deal has got to be killed. I think the Iranians have already violated it by testing long-range missiles and by sending Soleimani to Russia in violation of sanctions to buy missiles and weapons. There will be no Iranian deal or nuclear weapons. But one last thing. Anti-Semitism, in addition to radical Islam, is something that, as a Roman Catholic, has troubled me enormously. And we see it today not just with radical Islamists and jihad. We see it in communities and on college campuses in America, in the absurd movement called BDS, Boycott, Divest, and Sanction Israel. Think about it for a minute. The left, these people advancing this absurd cause, think it's okay to trade with Iran, where women have essentially no rights. It's fine to trade with Russia, where homosexuality is a crime and they put you in jail. It's fine to trade with Cuba, where if you say something a little disagreeable to the powers, you go to jail for life. But you can't trade with Israel, that has a democracy, freedom of speech, freedom to choose its leaders, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. Oh no, they're the ones we have to boycott, divest, and sanction. That is absurd. BDS is not a human rights movement. It is an anti-Semitic movement, and it must be stopped whenever it raises its ugly head. So, thank you. So I've run out of time, but I just want to say one more thing. Thank you for all that you have done and continue to do for our party and our country. Thank you for standing strong through these last 7 years when the world seems to have gotten to be a more and more dangerous place. This is still America. This is still the greatest, innovative, freest country in the world. With the right leadership in 2016, we're going to see an end to Alzheimer's, a cure to cancer. We're going to travel in cars that drive us. We're going to be going in trains faster than planes. Your grandchildren are going to be living to 110 years old. This is still America. All we need to do is get Washington right, and the next century will be right. You are fighting that fight. You are with us. Thank you. Hazak, Hazak, Vanit, Hazak. Be strong. Be strong. Give your strength to others. We must win this race in 2016. Thank you very much. Thank you.